Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor. Today we're talking about the first chapter of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. So, you read any good books lately?
Yeah, so I read Infinite Jest lately.
Oh, wow. Like yesterday?
Yeah, in fact, well, I read a part of it yesterday. What about you, Trevor?
Infinite Jest? I've never heard of that.
Yeah, must be some elitist bullshit.
No, yeah, I read the first chapter yesterday, and it pretty much like immediately pulled me in. Just like, yeah, I'm not someone who gets really infatuated with like writing and the way people write, but it's hard not to, with just the way that every sentence has like so much detail in it and so much,
Absolutely.
so much thought has obviously gone into the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. But it's so remarkable because it's such a long and complicated book, where every single moment has the exact same amount of detail, to the point where it's not something that he could have sat down and crafted meticulously over. It was like a natural outpouring of his inner expression.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he comes through in the book. His personality comes through a lot. I mean, because it's from the first person perspective, part of that.
Yeah, at least in the beginning.
Yeah. Although I have to say, my favorite part of it is that like the 18-year-old character who's narrating, like everyone around him is saying that, like basically the whole thrust of the chapter is that he's there in front of admissions people at a college, and they're asking him why his test scores are so low and his 9 essays are like all on these crazy like advanced academic topics and like
Yeah.
but then the way it's narrated is like from a very intelligent point of view, where he's like literally like critiquing other people's usage and
and even using terms like usage.
Yeah.
Which I had never heard until that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I must be a uneducated plebeian.
I don't know if I'd heard that before, but like I understood what he meant.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
He portrays that feeling very vividly, to the point where it's disorienting to the reader because you're not sure what exactly is going on, because it seems like all the kid does is just like stand up and say something, and then his arms are like pinned behind his back and people think he's having a seizure. And
Yeah.
he's wheeled out on a gurney, and yeah, I reread it. Yeah, I read it twice, and it's still kind of disorienting the second time where exactly things turn and become crazy.
Yeah, that it's narrated from his internal perspective, where his reality is having said eloquent phrases at these people, and whereas their reality is, what was the word? Waggling, I believe. Waggling. Yeah. Ungodly noises like a goat with something stabbing it in the eye.
Yeah.
I think it said. Yeah, and to me that feels like something that probably a lot of people can relate to, and I know I can as well.
yeah, I think that's pretty universal. Language is imperfect, but um,
Hmm. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Getting back into the Terence McKenna understanding of language, where all words are abstractions from the truth and can never perfectly represent the truth.
yeah, I mean, it's like you could imagine a language that's so precise that you could say certain words and people would literally see a different color, but theoretically, but we don't have that language, obviously, and even explaining things like emotions or thoughts is very hit or miss as to whether people are actually gonna understand what you mean.
Hmm. Could you elaborate? I'm not sure I understand your idea of this hypothetical language.
Uh, this is something I saw in a Vsauce video, but like, uh, I mean, I don't even know what it would be. I mean, the surefire thing it could be is like, if Neuralink works out and you're able to wire numbers to someone's brain to have them perceive red, is that much different than a language that's being spoken? It's still information.
Wow, I mean that's really a strange concept to me, and I'm not sure I understand if that's like has that been done?
No, but it's only a matter of time.
Are you sure?
Oh yeah, I mean, it could be like 100 years before any of that works. But already, I mean, people have ocular implants that are letting them see light and darkness,
Hmm.
and it's not out of the question that we could directly stimulate the part of the brain that sees color in a way that you would see red.
Interesting. So does this kind of disprove the long asked question? It like, do we all see red the same way, or is like one person's red actually like
No,
another person's
because
turquoise?
all you can really say is you're stimulating the same part of the brain, and the person's actual experience, we don't actually know if it's the same. But at that point, it's like
Hmm.
if the brain anatomy is exactly the same and you're stimulating the same part, you kind of have to be um, a little crazy to think that it's not producing the same phenomenon in someone else's awareness.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, an actual language with words that you would speak that would do that is it's hard to imagine what that would actually
Hmm.
look like. But
But that would imply a similarity of structure from one person to another, the context with around which that particular stimulation activity occurs, right? Um, which is maybe not such a far-fetched thing. I mean, we are in many ways very similar, but isn't it conceivable that a mind could create different forms and different structures so that when you have a particular stimulus, even if it's the same stimulus, it interacts with the system as a whole in a completely different way.
yeah, yeah, that could definitely be true. I mean, there are like literally billions of moving parts, so
Yeah. It would make sense that a lot of us sort of develop similar patterns and structures to help us understand the world, but it seems to me entirely possible for different people to develop different strategies that that all work in ways to understand the world, and so like you can get by with these different structures in your mind, but that each one is entirely unique.
yeah. You mean unique as between like the structures themselves, or unique as compared to other people's structures in their heads?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure I see the distinction.
I mean, everyone could be walking around with a bunch of structures in their head that are distinct, but all the structures are the same to each other from person to person. But I don't think that's I don't think that's what actually exists.
Interesting. I as a child, occasionally I would have this thought of, what if my entire existence here is a fabrication made by my parents, who are they're actually really rich, and I'm actually mentally deficient. I am a unintelligent blob, and they are paying a lot of money to have these people around me act as though I am a normal person and interact with me as though I am not, in fact, a cretin.
So what age did you entertain that idea at?
I must have been 13 or 14.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 15.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I had I had some kind of theories like that about my parents. It was more like I thought there was something that people just weren't telling me, like adults weren't telling me about the way the world works. Which is true, but I thought it was like, oh, maybe we actually know what happens when you die, and they aren't telling me, because like it's like that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have that thought about like in just like social situations, like, oh, everyone's just being nice to me, even though like I'm really awkward and like I say the wrong shit, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that's everyone.
But that's interesting too, especially that you brought up like the like your parents maybe have some vision into like I don't know, the metaphysical questions that plague humanity. I have had an experience that same time that we did acid together. The 2 tabs of acid.
Yeah.
This was at the time where I went with Aiden and just kind of fucked off and disappeared.
Yeah. Did you go to JP the show? Yeah.
Yeah, we went to the show at the Black Box Theater, and really extraordinary and moving and insightful and powerful and erotic performance.
Oh yeah, there were like dancers and stuff, right?
Yes, there were. Yeah, and there were comical moments as well, and the whole audience was laughing, and I was laughing with the audience, and Jim Simmons next to me was laughing uproariously, and it was so funny. And then I realized, oh, all of these people, all of these entities here with me are extra-dimensional beings. They're four spatial dimensional beings who have transcended this plane and who all see me, this 3-dimensional ape, toying with these psychedelics that are allowing me to glance into their plane of existence. And it's so endearing and pathetic and comical that they're all laughing at me. I had the distinct feeling that all of these people are laughing at me, but in such a good natured.
I mean, did you think they knew you were on acid? Interesting. I'm still not sure I get exactly what you mean. Wait, so the people Who's sensing your approach? Is it it's the extra dimensional projections of the people that you're sitting around?
Yeah. So there's the distinction: is that the people around me, they weren't confined by their bodies or anything. They were just representations of these extra dimensional entities.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And so how does that relate to the laughing again? Like, what was special about laughing?
They were all laughing at me. Like, that's what the laughter was about, was they saw me ditzing around, and it was so comical that they were all brought to laughter.
But they were laughing at the show in reality, right?
Were they, though?
I mean... That's why I was confused.
Yeah. Yeah. I was too confused.
You were confused. Yeah. So is there any like insight you can give me into the first chapter without spoiling the rest of the book?
Yeah. I'll hold my tongue on that one. There's definitely a huge ass spoiler that I can tell you right now, but I
don't.
Won't. Well, one little thing that it won't really be a spoiler is the next chapter will be like a flashback to a year previously, at which point you'll find out that Hal is an entirely normal and well-adjusted individual with no trouble communicating at all.
Yeah, well, and then he mentions like something about, if I'd written this essay a year ago, it would have looked like an infant like mashing a keyboard.
Yeah.
Is that he has like some accident or some kind of like temporary
spoilers?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was something there.
I was thoroughly disoriented by that first chapter. The first time I tried to read Infinite Jest, where I got maybe about a fifth of the way through, I could not catch the tone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I immediately, like, after like the first page, I felt like I'd never read anything exactly like that. Someone writing exactly like that, and it was such a specific tone that I could definitely see that.
Yeah, so you know, Trevor, that I have recently moved into the state of Massachusetts, where I've spent some passing time in Boston. Reading this book really illuminated my understanding of the culture of Boston and the mindset of the New England upper and lower class citizens.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember our friend Aiden from CU Boulder. I remember him telling me after he'd read it that it made him appreciate what it was like to be an American, or like appreciate just I don't know if appreciate is the right word, but like it's a pretty clear. He said it was a pretty clear picture of like American, I guess like white American culture.
Yeah, and perhaps the disparity with what Black Americans experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you were talking about. Sorry, you just say that we were just talking about the first chapter is about not being understood and not being able to communicate.
What?
It's interesting to think about why he brings in that like anecdote in the middle about when he was a kid and he tried to eat the moss and was and his mom was just like running around screaming and I feel like that's, I mean, it must be related to the not being able to communicate things somehow, because he was just so obviously wrong about what the moss was and like what it would do.
Interesting. And I've read some theories about what that particular flashback was about, but nothing I'm gonna say as of yet. So yeah, this idea of the disparity between your experience and the quote unquote objective experience of what's really happening. And you had mentioned that this experience of not being able to express yourself is universal, that everyone has it, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can never 100% get across what you mean to get across.
Yeah, absolutely. And so,
yeah.
What's interesting to me about that is that it's seems to be a law of nature more than anything, right? It's like speaks to the fact that our experiences as conscious entities are unique, but also subjective and don't always align in the same way.
Yeah. It's interesting to try to think about like a counterexample for that, and I don't think you really could.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is something that I've kind of been thinking about in relation to the life is just a loop thing. What does it mean for two things to be exactly the same in the universe if they're separated by time? Like, if there are two like experiences, two beings that exist and are exactly the same, and they exist at two different times in the universe, is that one experience or is it two experiences?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I've actually thought about that as well. And in the context of to get a little pseudoscience-y, although not to say that I endorse or believe this perspective, but just an interesting thought that I have encountered is the idea of communing with one's past lives. Which you have to accept the idea of reincarnation in some form or another, which is debatable, but that maybe this experience that people have of communing with their past lives is some sort of connection between those moments that are identical in certain regards.
Interesting. What kind of things do people have? How do people feel like they have connections? Is it like they have certain memories they can't explain, or like they remember
exactly.
certain things?
And so what if there are certain prominent parts of your personality that form an identity that are identical somewhere else in history? And if so, if they are identical enough that maybe they are, as you were saying, part of the same experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of like we don't really know if there are islands of consciousness in our brain that are separate from us, right? That we're completely sealed off from.
I feel like there's gotta be.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows?
Or at least there's a disparity between our perceived sense of selves and the entirety of ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, do you think something like reincarnation exists?
The part of it that resonates with me is this concept of similitude, where you have recurring themes, I guess, in different points in history, just like I was kind of just mentioning, and that these themes are representations of the same entity, in sort of the same or a similar concept to the Jungian archetypes.
Interesting.
Yeah, where there's like these entities or concepts that emerge repeatedly in human psyche.
And so that's what's actually getting reincarnated, and the fact that we're just seeing like discrete individual people pop up is just kind of an artifact.
Yeah.
Or that it seems like there's distinct consciousnesses that are like tied to people's skulls.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's funny that you should mention that, because I've also had an experience, this also on psychedelics, of it seemed to me as though I could see the consciousness. I could see it when it was within individuals, but I went over to the next door where some of my family members were having dinner, and sat down and I was just listening to the conversation. And as these people were conversing around me, I could see the consciousness. Where the consciousness was not rooted inside the skulls of the people. It was this like wave that would emerge out of the air in between the people, and would sort of form its own life, so that the actual consciousness existed in this only in the space of the two people interacting, and not necessarily in either of the agents.
Huh. That's a cool idea. But we do have to ask the question whether psychedelics are showing us anything that's true about reality, or whether it's just turning some dials in our brain that makes us. I mean, I think it definitely, psychedelics definitely do tell us something about our brain. I don't know if they can really tell us anything about like the fundamental nature of reality or anything like that, or how. I mean, they can show us that consciousness is like they can show you that there's no like subject object distinction, right? They can destroy that barrier, but as far as like showing you anything like metaphysical beyond that, I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting
you can really
that's
trust.
An interesting point, because even as you're taking the psychedelic, you're still not separating yourself from the experience of the flesh and bones body, and so by not doing that, it's not granting you a perspective of anything beyond what's limited to that experience.
Yeah. Although, I mean, when you like, I would say the exception is probably DMT, because that's produced in our brain and obviously has something very, very significant to do with how our brain works. And that's the one drug that I would guess maybe does have something to show us as far as like the fundamental nature of consciousness and that kind of thing.
Interesting.
But
I've never
know.
taken DMT myself.
Yeah, I haven't either.
But so here to contradict myself now, the thing about psychedelics though is, and any psychedelic really, is it's kind of like taking a step towards separating yourself from the experience of your flesh and bones body.
Totally.
And in that, I think we can derive a lot of value and understanding.
Yeah, it can demonstrate that you shouldn't really be like blaming yourself for all your problems as much as you are. Not to mean you shouldn't fix them, but
what are you talking about? All my problems are other people's fault. If it weren't for my damn parents.
Yeah, it is interesting though. Like I've been using this meditation app that was created by Sam Harris, who's has this other podcast, and but he has like years and years of experience in meditation, and he has these on the app. There's these conversations you can listen to with with people who are like think about mindfulness and meditation for a living, and also people who have done research on psychedelics. And he was talking to this one researcher from France, and they were talking about, and she was talking very specifically about how like when you take something like acid, you should go into it with like a some question you have, or some like some kind of goal, like therapeutic goal, which I thought I mean, and she was talking from like a therapeutic perspective.
Yeah, I've heard the same idea from Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah. Which is interesting because the first time I took it, I had no idea that was like one of the things, and pretty much what did happen is like I started thinking kind of intensely about like the stuff in my life and like what was happening, and like and I think that just started like really disorient me, and in that sense it can show you something kind of true about yourself, like about your own psyche. Like I think that's kind of where it's useful is if not showing you something fundamental about reality, it's showing you how your mind works and showing you what it's capable of.
Absolutely. And that maybe there is some sliver of reality within your mind.
What do you mean by that?
Well, okay, so this starts to get into the idea of, are you in a simulation? Which popularized by Elon Musk, but has existed since before he started talking about it.
I think yeah.
So
it's been around for a long time.
Would you talk about this idea?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So simulation argument is basically that there's a certain number of technological civilizations that will arise in our galaxy, and we have to assume when they get to a certain point in their technology that they'll be able to create perfect ancestor simulations of their past ancestors, and that those simulations would be completely conscious, and to be one of those simulated beings would be indistinguishable from being in quote unquote base reality, that's not simulated. And you can also imagine that every such civilization would probably create more than one simulation if they could, right? So however many simulations you think they would create, it makes it that much more likely that we're in a simulation and not base reality, because there would naturally be so many more simulated realities than base reality.
But yeah, absolutely. And the key for me, what you just said, is that to be in such a simulation is indistinguishable from being a conscious entity anywhere else. I mean, it's still, even as a simulation, it's an expression of consciousness. And at least from my understanding of how the world works, it is the experience of consciousness that imbues anything with meaning, and is therefore the goal. It's the value of anything.
No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, even if we are in a simulation, that doesn't that doesn't mean that our consciousness is any less important. because that's really the only thing we know for sure is that something is happening.
Yeah, that's what matters, right?
We could be wrong about what is happening, but that something is happening it can't be not true.
Whoa. If you're in base reality, are you like 100% certain that every experience you have is the actual experience?
What do you mean by that?
Like, okay, in our reality, nothing is perfect, right? Words are abstractions from the meaning, and everyone's experience is slightly misaligned from the objective reality that everyone around them experiences, right? But so what if in base reality that's not true? In base reality, that's the world where everything is perfectly aligned and everyone just knows the truth all the time.
It's possible. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because literally, like, the laws of physics could be different in the next level up. We wouldn't know. I mean, like, if it is something like an ancestor simulation, I guess you would think that it would be the same laws of physics that people are simulating. But we don't know that either.
Yeah. But so then, as the closer you get to your experience of reality aligning with the objective reality of existence around you, the higher, lower down in the chain you get towards base reality.
Why do you say that again?
So the closer your subjective reality lines up with the objective reality around you, the closer you are to base reality.
I don't know if that would necessarily be true. Because it's not like, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be like, it wouldn't have to be a game of telephone where everyone's like simulating something slightly different than before. It could just be totally random as to what people are simulating, or it could be like always be the same. I guess if people try to make it always, copy exactly the base reality, it would start to get a little bit off after a few.
Yeah, but if you had that kind of processing power, is that what you'd do? Or would you explore variations of experience and make new realities?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that's a pretty good answer to the Fermi paradox, is that anyone who invents technology that's advanced enough to travel through space can also invent perfect virtual reality that's basically heaven, and why would anyone want to leave that? And having that technology also means you can basically know everything about the universe you'd want to know without having to leave and trying to colonize space.
I think it's interesting. Is there a fitness problem that we encounter then, in terms of if you were to consider all of these distinct civilizations as competitors, evolving simultaneously in the primordial soup of our existence, that at some of these variations there's maybe going to be more aggressive conquest type ones who might go and attack the people who have spent all their resources in making their own little heroin dream heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would be like a post AGI kind of utopia where like no one has to work, and basically everyone's needs are taken care of, and basically there's not much left to do other than just experience beauty and have relationships and
lots of sex,
do all the fun human stuff, virtual sex. Can you imagine if you were
Oh, every night.
If you're in virtual
every
reality,
night,
you
I
can
imagine.
no, you can have sex with like 100 people at once, like that experience, whatever that means, you can have it.
Have sex with someone and all of their past lives at the same time.
I compose what I project will be seen as a smile. I turn this way and that, slightly, sort of directing the expression to everyone in the room.
Oh gosh, yeah. Me at every college party I went to.
Yeah.
Okay, but that raises a question. Aren't there people who don't have this sort of experience? Like well-adjusted, normal, confident people who don't have any second guessing of their own expression.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a certain intelligence cutoff for that, because at a certain point someone's going to be smart enough to start, like being concerned with the way they're being perceived. I feel like that's just kind of like a basic trait of like, I don't know. I feel like the smarter you get, the more likely that is to happen. Although some people are smart and they're so gifted socially that they don't have to care, because they just naturally do whatever is the right thing to do.
Sure, yeah. And yeah, so I definitely think there is a tendency for smart people to get wrapped up in their own heads and start having experience of second guessing and stuff. But I feel like that's more just a product of how smartness manifests in our current culture, as opposed to a fundamental aspect of like, that's the smart thing to do.
Interesting. Say more about that.
Like, yeah, like, wouldn't it be more smart, as you were saying, just to recognize that that was a possibility and to choose not to get wrapped up in all that bullshit and just to have fun and express yourself however you want?
Yeah, I mean, that's great, but then you have to think about, I mean, if you're in a position like a job, or you're in school, like you have to think about like the political consequences, for the lack of a better word, about what you're saying and how people are going to take it and what people are going to think of you. And in 95% of situations it doesn't really matter at all, but you never really know when the 5% of those situations that matter are going to happen.
So yeah, and okay, yeah, but yeah, totally. And so that means that it's a product of the social environment that we have created for ourselves, as opposed to of actually being smart.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's I mean, something like that social environment has existed as long as, I mean, it exists in animal like societies, like, like
Mm.
with like, gorillas, where there's a clear ranking of the alpha male, and then everyone is kind of below him, um that kind of stuff.
The term is Big Daddy. A friend of mine said something that I thought was really beautiful, which was that saints and poets don't have restraint. They only have exuberance.
That's interesting. Huh?
Yeah. And particularly the saint part of that is fascinating to me. It made me think of Alyosha in The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I don't know if you're
I've heard the
that
name
one.
a bunch of times, but I haven't read it.
We'll definitely have to do
Yeah,
that as a future episode.
Yeah.
Really incredible piece of work. But there's this character who is really kind of saintly. He's just this caring individual, very intelligent and perceptive and caring, and he just does what's in his heart all the time, and people love him, and the world is better for his experience.
That's a nice idea.
And isn't that, if your goal is to exist and to flourish on this earth, isn't that the smart thing to do? To live like that?
But how can you be sure that that's actually how you're living? That you're not just deceiving yourself, that you're only having positive effects.
Well, interesting, but yeah, I feel like if you were to talk to Alyosha in the book, he would say nothing of the sort. If you were to say he was a saint, he would say, "Gosh, no, I'm just a person. I'm doing the best that I can. I'm as flawed as anyone." So, in continuing our conversation from a moment ago about people who get wrapped up in their head, and that being intelligence, and people who act intentionally to not get wrapped up in their heads. Isn't that kind of the difference between people who think they're smart and people who are smart?
Yeah, similar. Yeah, I mean, it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect.
I've heard that, but can you remind me what that is?
So it's like when you first start doing a thing, like learning how to, play drums or something. At first, you're not good enough to know how bad you are, so you think you're doing pretty well, and then so you overrate your confidence based on the fact that you're not very good at it.
Yeah. Which actually that ties in with a later theme in Infinite Jest of, he speaks about irony, and that in the postmodern world, it's just saturated with irony and people, who think they understand things, and they see the way everything is fucked up, and they are so overcome by this that the only response is the ironic. That it's sort of an agony even to be drawn to the point of irony, and that the only way out of that loop is to be the credulous fool who acts intentionally and follows their own.
No, I think I think I'd heard him talk about that kind of thing. Either was like one of those PBS blank on blank YouTube videos, or like so just some YouTube video with clips of him talking. But he was talking about how it was like something to do with sincerity, and like how people have to cloak everything under all this irony now, and
Yeah,
we've kind
absolutely.
of lost touch with what it means to just be sincere, and like you were saying, to follow your
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
individual.
and to not be afraid, and even to go forward, and even knowing that people are going to laugh at you
Yeah.
for doing that and for being sincere.
Yeah. Actually, you know what this reminds me of a little bit?
Mm.
Did you ever read that book, Confederacy of Dunces?
No, I've heard of it
The
though.
the way the writing is, where it's kind of disorienting, the way, different characters cut in and out, and the way everything is described is kind of like really detailed and grotesque, and
Mm.
like that whole thing. Um,
That's really interesting. And actually, those qualities that you just mentioned are kind of, I feel like they're the spirit of consciousness in Boston and in the New England area. It's this very heady, intellectual, wrapped up, just like it's embedded in the way people speak. All these conditionals that are baked into the way people talk, and but so and for.
Interesting. I don't know if I know exactly what you mean.
um yeah, it's a very particular and subtle thing that you might not notice at first, just speaking to someone in the New England area, or passing through. But if you're here for a little while, for me it really started to jump out, especially coming from Colorado, where people speak, I think, much more clearly and directly.
Uh-huh.
But in Boston and the New England area, you're much more likely to get these long, winding sentences where the subject occurs much later in the sentence, and you have to follow along all the way until then for the thing to make sense.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And there's a kind of a proliferation of syllables, as it were.
What do you mean by that?
There was a sign down by the dock that I saw, and I thought that is exactly what New England is. And it said, use of dinghy dock is at your own risk. The sign said. Now, if this sign were in Colorado, it would say, use dock at own risk. But in Massachusetts, the sign is, use of dinghy dock is at your own risk.
It's kind of like it's like words like ain't and y'all actually make language way more efficient than it would be otherwise.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you noticed, like, what's like the West Coast like compared to that?
The West Coast is much more measured, kind of in line with Colorado. Another element of the energy that I've noticed is on the East Coast, people are much more likely to interrupt. There's not so much space in conversation. People are jumping in to get their own word in, speaking over other people, and that this is sort of encouraged and expected of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Every time I've been over there, everyone's just like trying to get somewhere as fast as they can. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's so crowded, and there's a mentality that in order for me to get by, I have to shut everyone else out. I'm the only person who exists, who really matters.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone else, they're just noise in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a pretty alienating way to live. Maybe I can find an example of this New England language in here. So this is just like an essay title.
Mm-hmm.
Why, though in the early days of interlaces, interneted teleputers that operated off largely the same fiber digital grid as the phone companies, the advent of video telephoning, aka videophony, enjoyed an interval of huge consumer popularity. Callers thrilled at the idea of phone interfacing both orally and facially, the little first-generation phone video cameras being too crude and narrow-apertured for anything much more than facial close-ups, on first-generation teleputers that at the time were little more than high-tech TV sets, though of course they had that little intelligent agent homuncular icon that would appear at the lower right of the broadcast cable program and tell you the time and temperature outside, or remind you to take your blood pressure medication, or alert you to a particularly compelling entertainment option now coming up on channel like 491 or something, comma, or of course now alerting you to an incoming video phone call, and then tap dancing with a little iconic straw boater and cane just under a menu of possible options for response. And callers did love their little homuncular icons, but why within like 16 months or 5 sales quarters, the tumescent demand curve for videophony suddenly collapsed like a kicked tent, so that by the year of the depend adult undergarment, fewer than 10% of all private telephone communications utilized any video image fiber data transfers or coincident products and services. The average US phone user deciding that S/she actually preferred the retrograde old low-tech Bell-era voice-only telephonic interface after all, a preferential about-face that cost a good many precipitant video telephony-related entrepreneurs their shirts, plus destabilizing 2 highly respected mutual funds that had ground-floored heavily in videophone technology, and very nearly wiping out the Maryland State Employees Retirement System Freddie Mac Fund, a fund whose administrator's mistress's brother had been an almost maniacally precipitant videophone technology entrepreneur. And but so why the abrupt consumer retreat back to good old voice-only telephoning?
Spectacular.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's remarkable, and at the same time, it's a great example of obviously exaggerated the forms of speaking that happen within New England conversation, where there's these sort of concept smudged in after concept with no spacing or regard for balance, and overlapping each other and interposed upon each other.
That wasn't literally
all
one
was.
sentence what you just read, right?
Yeah.
It was all one sentence.
And that's not where he stops. There's a monologue somewhere in here that's a whole chapter that's one sentence.
I guess one thing I wanted to ask you is like the like, does the theme of like academic or like academic cheating, that kind of thing, does that get like further developed, or
In some regards, I remember there's a couple scenes relating to it. What do you ask?
I'm just curious. Like, I mean, I guess I'll find it as I keep reading it, but yeah, whether the setting is just kind of like, if there are any issues that are specific to like academic stuff, or if it's just kind of like a springboard for other.
No, it definitely. I think
things.
it explores the dichotomy between the academic experience and the uneducated experience. I guess uneducated is kind of a pretentious way to phrase that. Those lacking in the privilege of education. Somehow that sounds even more pretentious. Street bums. Yeah.
Plebes. Yeah, I think the most fascinating part of this chapter for me was just the, like we were talking about, the disconnect between his inner monologue and what's actually happening on the outside. Just the fact that his inner monologue is so articulate and just he seems to know very lucidly and exactly what is happening to him, but he can't really do anything about it.
Makes you think of coma victims or coma patients, I guess.
Yeah. But I mean, aren't we all like
Are we
that?
all like that? Are we though?
I mean, if you think free will doesn't exist, then yes.
Wait, if I think that free will does not exist, then we are all unable to communicate our inner experiences?
No, it's more that we can understand what's happening to us and we can articulate what's happening to us, but as far as actually changing the direction of what's happening, we can't really do that. I mean, we can we can change the direction, but we can't change the changing of the direction.
Whoa. Mind blown. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I mean, so you're not on board with free will not existing?
No, I'm not.
Okay. We should do a whole episode on
Absolutely.
that. But okay, well, do you accept that either A, we're living in a deterministic universe, or B, that there's some kind of quantum uncertainty involved that is not deterministic but probabilistic?
Sure,
like,
absolutely.
One of those two things? Okay, so if it's completely deterministic, then everything is going to happen the way it's going to happen no matter what. And there's no room for free will, right? Even if it's random, then it would just be that you think you're having the illusion that it's your choice, but it's actually just a random quantum event that's creating what you perceive as your choice. And if you pay attention, like if you're meditating or something, and you pay attention to like how thoughts arise in your head, you can notice that like you're not thinking them; they're just kind of appearing. Because you can't think a thought before you think it, right? It just you can't decide to have a thought. I mean, you can think, you can like have thoughts that progress and like add on to each other, but when a thought itself arises, you can't make it arise. It just, it just appears. And if you notice that that's not under your control, then what is under your control? Because everything, all your actions and all your beliefs and stuff come from those thoughts.
Interesting. To me, that comes down again to the idea of the dissolution of the self, and of certainly if you're defining yourself as an entity that is separate or limited to a particular subset of reality, that in so limiting yourself, you are cutting off any sort of free will that you might have in those regards.
Yeah, but it does connect definitely to the dissolution of the self, because it's part of the same insight that you're continuous with the universe and you're inextricably connected to it, and there's not really a discernible starting point or ending point for where your actions become your own.
Yeah. And so like, and then what if you are, rather than you are the entity that you think you are, what if what you really are is those impulses that are arising as if spontaneously? And if you are those things, then you have the freedom to either be or not to be. I feel like that.
Well, what does that mean?
I guess I don't really have a way to back this up, but it feels to me as though one of the most central qualities of existing in any capacity is the ability to not exist. You know, you can engage with your reality or you can disengage. And in any given moment, any impulse, any mote of perception that says I am can say, but I don't want to be. You know? You are, and you are, and you are until you're not. And in a certain sense, you have to kind of see that as a decision.
I'm not sure what you're talking about besides, like, you're not talking about, like, committing suicide.
No, I'm speaking on a more diffuse level, as opposed to as individuals, more if you would consider each human individual as a colony or conglomeration of individual points of perception, where each awareness is its own entity that connects with the greater whole that forms the identity of yourself. That each of those points has its own ability to either exist or not exist.
How?
It has to be that way if that existence occurs in eternity as opposed to over time. Because how else would there be anything apart from that eternity that particular entity is experiencing?
You lost me somewhere in there.
Okay, yeah, this is a weird idea, I guess.
So you're saying there's, like, individual parts that make us up, and those each on their own can choose to not exist or exist.
Exactly. And in so doing, they can form a sort of binary code of existing and not existing that forms our actions and our decisions.
Yeah, I mean, like, that could all be true. I don't think that proves that there's free will.
Oh, it's definitely not a proof. I have no conclusive evidence, but it seems to me every bit as plausible as the opposite of there being no free will.
Yeah. So do you think, so, like, when people talk about free will, there's one camp that's no free will, and then there's another camp that's there's two camps that believe in free will, and one is compatibilism, which is, like, basically we don't have what people think of as free will classically, but we have something that's kind of like that, even though it's very, very limited. And then there's libertarian free will, which is basically just what most people would think of as free will. Like, you can do whatever you want. You can make your own decisions. And
this is America.
So
I'll do what I want. You believe in freedom.
Freedom of will.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm definitely more in the first camp. I think there are always limitations to our experience, but at the same time, there's always a little or a lot of wiggle room.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we should do a whole episode on that, because it like, even if you accept that it doesn't exist, then you have to worry about, like, how it affects moral responsibility for things.
Yeah, of course.
Because to some extent you need to still punish people somehow.
You've been a naughty boy.
You know,
you deserve this.
Yeah, because some people need to be punished.
Yes. I might, if you'd like to talk about something from one of my journals.
Sure.
Actually going on to this idea of disillusionment of self. Okay, so it's titled, How Can I Know That My Life Isn't More Valuable Than Anyone Else's? The being I refer to as I is a conglomeration of points of existence, perceptions arranged in a complex structure, all connected by way of existing in a shared space simultaneously. Though I am accustomed to thinking of myself as an individual, it is equally true that I am a culture of beings existing amid the intricate structure of my mind, all banding together more or less to increase the safety of our existence and our ability to grow. As each point of perception within me is continuously endeavoring to exist, each one has value to itself. I am comprised wholly of these. In order to exist as the individual that I am accustomed to seeing myself as, and to declaim that my existence has value, I must recognize the value of every single one of these points of existence. I must also recognize that other humans and all other beings are comprised the same way. Therefore, they must have the same inherent value as me.
Interesting. So you're kind of saying that everyone has a similar structure to their mind, or to their...
Well, the actual forms of the structure could vary, but the building blocks are all the same.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Cool.
I mean, if we're all our minds come from the same kind of brain architecture.
Well, but that it's not the brain architecture that is the fundamental unit, but rather it is the notion, the ideological notion of perception. It is the thing that is perceiving.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's no thing that's perceiving. There's just perception is the like the bottom line of existence.
But you could also see it. I mean, that's an entirely valid way to understand the world. But you could also see within, let's say, for example, one particular person's brain, there are so many different neurons and whatever, and there are so many very different specialized neurons that are only looking for one thing in particular. I was reading about this in Ray Kurzweil's How to Create a Mind, where he talks about how perception happens, and like in his example, he's exploring how to create text reading software that can read handwritten text, and he has many different little neurons. Each one is looking for something very particular. For example, one of them is only looking for the crossbar of an A. Maybe another one is only looking for some diagonal slant, or it's only looking for a circle. And if it sees that, it fires off. And when that combines with other neurons that are specialized to perceive other elements of reality, then it forms a concept of the word, or of whatever it's perceiving.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if this is like current, but I think one of the theories about consciousness is that it's just the brain representing things in some way. kind of like you were describing, where if that neuron fires because it sees the little crossbar in the A, it's representing that crossbar of the A in some kind of code inside your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and that representation might be what we're perceiving, or I mean, it has to be, right. We're not actually perceiving the object itself. We're just perceiving
of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what's so fascinating because, as you know, the neurons inside your brain are connected to what? Other neurons, right? And so that neuron that's looking for the crossbar of the A is the only input that it has is other neurons within the brain, which are in turn connected through a long series to the ocular nerve, which is receiving light as the input source. But it's able to parse that data in such a way that with reasonable certainty it can say, this neuron, I want you only to look for the crossbar of the A.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that our brain can do that. I mean, it has to be some constellation of like really minute things like that, right? But it's still just kind of mind-boggling.
It is, and this structure is, I think, the same basis that machine learning is being built around.
Yeah. Like, I mean, neural networks are basically modeled on individual components that act like a neuron.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting because you can have the conversation about how, no one can ever know anyone else's experience exactly, but, from an alien's perspective, like, our bodies are so fucking similar to each other. Like, it's just little, it's like these little, like, minute changes that, like, because, I mean, obviously there's a huge range of human experience, right? But that's a very small spectrum on the vast possible range of experiences, right, that any being could have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're saying that maybe we're more alike than we are different.
Yeah, I mean, we just have nothing to compare consciousness to, because we only have the one species that we can communicate with and talk about what it's like. But if you take a bigger perspective, it seems like in the end we're all probably having pretty similar experiences, and to another, for like an actually outside alien perspective, it would seem almost exactly identical.
Yeah. But then in the grand scheme of things, maybe we're more like the alien on a base level than not. I don't know.
What do you mean?
Well, maybe just that we're all comprised of the same units of perception, and that's fundamental to existing.
Yeah, you're right. It could be that when we finally make contact, it turns out that consciousness is pretty constricted in how it can actually operate by how it perceives. But
yeah, in any experience of the world, you have to have a slice of the infinite and a slice of the finite.
Yeah. And actually, they're already like able to give people basically synesthesia and like give people the ability to sense magnetic fields with their body with like Neuralink type stuff, and implants. So like it's yeah, I mean, that's the other side of it, is those other modes of perception are like on their way.
Wow, it's a brave new world.